Hello guys and welcome to another Sony Group tutorial. Today we're going to discuss about the ABAP Persistent Object Service or the POS. Uh, First of all, we need to understand what is the POS, the Persistent Object Service. If we go through the SAP docs, we can find some very interesting articles about this service. As you can see in this picture, the Persistent Object Services work as a logical layer between the application, the ABAP program, and the database. So why? What is the main reason of using the persistent object? So let's go back to the SAP. Let's say you want to deal with your tables and your entries as objects. You are developing a software using 100% object-oriented programming, and you don't want to use OpenSQL to select and insert or update data from the database. We know that using the SAP, we are not gonna find an object-oriented database. So what the persistent object service does, it's going to create the illusion for the programmer, for the developer, that he is actually working with an object-oriented database, but in fact he's not. So he's just working with an interface, which is this logical layer, right? As you can see right here, that will deal with all the create, read, update, and delete statements from the database. So we have two main different ways of implementing a persistent object. You can read more about these ways in this link, which is on the video description. But I'm gonna teach you how to implement a persistent object using a business key. So first of all, let's open a table at the ABAP dictionary. I'm going to use as flight for this example since it's the most known table in SAP for academic purposes. Right, so if I display all the fields from this table at the data dictionary, you can see we have all the key fields from the table. Right, so let's ignore this client field, which is not the case right now. So we have the care ID, which is the airline code. We have the flight connection number and the flight date. These three fields compose the business key, right? So basically every key field from a table is what creates the business key. So in this case, we're going to create a persistent class that will work with the asFlight table, right? And we're going to use the business key concept, right? So well, let's get to action. First of all, we're going to go to transaction SE24, and we're going to create a class called ZSK and R9 underscore CL as flight, right? Create the select class, and here a quick description. Here on class type, we're gonna select persistent class, right? So the transactions know what kind of class we're working with. The class name is, oh sorry, we must begin with ZCL. Yeah, that's a name pattern you must follow. Yeah. So package and request on request, not a big deal right now. So microcoding. Okay, so we have just created our persistent class. But so far, this is just a regular class, so like any other class. Okay, automatically the persistent class has some interfaces implemented and is friends with the base agent class. So we're going to go through that later. First, what we need to do you see this button right here, persistent represented. We're going to go and press this button, and the program is going to ask what table are we working with right now. So I am working with the table as flight, right? You can see right here we have all the fields from the as flight table, and the key fields are represented with this key icon. So we're gonna go and we're gonna select all these fields, and we're gonna send it as an attribute of our class, right? So just click the up button, and as you can see, my class ZCL as flight now has all the fields from the as flight table as attributes. Okay, so I am creating a class to represent an as flight entry in the database. You can see that all the key fields are represented in a different way. So they are because they are part of the business key. They are the business key. So we're gonna go. You have some like generator settings. You can change some of these options, but I'm not going to do that right now. This is maybe for next class, and we're just gonna hit save. And as you can see here at the bottom of the screen, it's generating all the sets and all the setters and getters to these new attributes. So if we go back to the screen, let's go to attributes. You can see that we have all those fields from the as flight tables are now attributes from our class, right? And interesting points. The business key or all the key fields from the table are set to read only. Right, this is interesting because if you go to the setters, to the setters and getters, you know, you have get car ID, get con ID, and get flight date, but you don't have a set. If you look for a set for this field, you're not gonna find it because there is no set car ID. You can't set a key field. There is no way of setting that after the object is created. The only way of setting key fields is when you are creating the persistent objects, right? We're gonna go check that later. So, okay, first let's for a quick test, let's just going to activate this class, right? It's gonna generate a lot of automatic code, and it takes a while, but no big deal. It's gonna ask for you to activate the class actor, right? So we're gonna hit yes, and you must be wondering, what is this class actor? We're gonna go through that. Just waiting until the class is activated. A lot of methods. Okay. And it's ready. Now, what you need to know about the persistent class is it's not unique. I mean, for every persistent class you create, there is a base agent class and an actor class. If you go to the friends attribute, you're gonna see this class is friends to the base agent class, which is the ZCB. This is like a pattern, right? ZCB. Let's go back to the SA24 initial screen, and we're gonna open the ZCA as flight. This is the class actor. What? ZB. Hold on. Oh, there is no CL. Sorry, my bad. ZCA as flight. Right. This, as we can see here, is the agent or the actor. What is the actor of a persistent class? The actor works as a singleton. The actor uses the singleton pattern. So as you can see here, we have an instance which is called agent, which is a static attribute, a public static attribute of itself, right? So this is basically the singleton pattern. I guess you guys already know that. If not, we're gonna go through that in another tutorial, not right now. every time every time the class constructor is called from the ZCA flight, it's going to create this first instance of the agent. The agent stores all the data, all the persistent class in memory, basically, right? You have a lot of functionalities that the agent class does, but in general, let's think of that as the main instance that is going to store all our persistent objects in memory during runtime. Okay, we're gonna use this guy to create and delete persistent objects. If you go to their methods, you can see we have create persistent and delete persistent. You have several methods, some of them which can be redefined, but the main method right here is the create persistent and the delete persistent methods. So we're going to create a test program. Let's go back to SE38. Right, let's create our test program. Just a simple executable program. And okay, so first of all, I'm going to create a selection screen with the business key fields, right? So block I can't remember all the main fields from the flight table. Sorry about that. So that's care ID, con ID, and flight date. Okay. We're gonna create right here. Right. Yeah, that's magic, guys. Okay, so this is our selection screen with the business key, which are all the key fields. When the users run the program, I want my program to get this business key and return the persistent object related to that business key. So to do that, I'm gonna create a global object as flight, type ref2 ZCL as flight. So this is our persistent class. Basically, let me just give you a quick example using the general table display. We're gonna go. I'm gonna show all the records from the flight table, right? So as you can see here, we have 394 hits, 394 entries. What is the persistent class? The persistent class represents an sfly entry. So for every instance of a persistent object, there will be an entry in the database. So okay, maybe not, right? When you create a persistent object, if you don't commit work, there will be no entry for that object in the database. But we're gonna go through that later. To begin with, so let's say I want to read all the data from this line, right? So what is the business key from this first line? So it's airline AA number 17 and flight date. We're gonna copy this key fields. We're gonna use this business key in our example, okay? So first of all, start of selection. What is gonna happen? I want the agent of the sflight class to get the persistent class that is represented by this line in the database. So I'm gonna ask the agent get persistent, and he's gonna ask me for the business key, and I'm gonna tell him the business key, and he's gonna return the persistent object. Right, there is an exception if the object is not found. I'm not gonna treat that right now. Uh, so okay, from now on, the agent has gave me the persistent object that represents this line, right? So let's go. I'm gonna add a breakpoint statement right here. I'm gonna execute the program and AA17, 17 flight date, run. Now, as you can see here, my object is a reference to the ZCLS flight, and it contains every single data from that line that represents that business key. So we have AA17, the flight date, the airfare, currency, and all those information are within the instance of the class. So right now you have in your hands, you have an object that represents an entry in the database. And that's awesome. You know, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Let's do more. Let's get some of these data, right? Let's create a simple string right here. String. I don't think I'm gonna need that, but anyway, I'm gonna write on screen go at flight get. Okay, I don't think I can write that. So let's say I want to get. You can get every single field from the table. So let's get the seats max, all right? The maximum number of seats in that flight. And I'm gonna write that to screen. Right. So as you can see, the possibilities are endless. So I guess this is the seats max field. But why should I use the persistent object service instead of just, using a select single from the database with the full key fields? The thing is, you can give life to your objects. Let's say you have this line represents a single flight, right? And if you think in a flight as an object, the flight is going to have its attribute, okay, and it's going to have its method. A flight has actions. So let's say I want to implement a new method in my persistent class. That's completely possible. So let's go back to my persistent class, and I'm going to create a new method. I'm going to create a method to book new people. I'm going to book someone. It doesn't matter. Instance public book new person to the flight. Okay, right? What this method is going to do? This method is basically going to increment 1 in the seats occupied and the occupied seats in economic class field. Okay, that's pretty much what it's going to do. It's a simple example. So we're gonna go back here. Let's okay, another hint for you, another hint. Never use directly the attributes of a persistent class. I mean, only for read-only purposes. So I want to increment the seats occ field. Don't write like add 1 to me seats occ. That's not going to work, right? You have to, every time you're going to change a value, you must use the setter of that attribute. Why? Well, because the setter of that attribute has like tons of code that you identify if that information changed or not, and it's gonna do its magic. And right, it doesn't matter to us what it's gonna do. We just have to use the setter. So I'm gonna create a local variable here, and this local variable is gonna receive my attribute. You can use the getter, but who cares right now. And I'm gonna add 1 to this local variable, and we're gonna set seats arc using this value. Okay, this is a simple method. This is like a process. I'm giving life to my database entry, because database entries are just inanimate data laying around and waiting to be processed by some kind of application. When you create a persistent object, you're giving life to that entry. You are giving actions to that entry. You are allowing that entry to interact with all kinds of stuff. So right now, I'm creating a simple method to book someone. All right. If I go back, I'm going back to my program. Where is my sample program? Okay. I'm gonna show you. I don't care. I don't like using right. I'm just going to use the breakpoint. Go as flight. Book someone. Right. So I'm just gonna call this method from within my sample program. I'm gonna show another breakpoint and then commit work. And now we're gonna see how the magic actually happens. So let's go back to the persistent object service, and at the same time I'm going to as a 16. This is the entry we are talking about. Okay, this is this first entry. As you can see, we have 377 seats occupied in the economic class. If you go back to my program, if you open the persistent object, you're gonna see we have indeed 375 seats occupied. Now I'm gonna call the book someone method, right? It's gonna get the amount of seats occupied. It's gonna add 1 to that, and it's gonna set that seat occupied information. Now, if you go back to our persistent object, you can see we have 378 seats occupied. Now, interesting fact: if you go back to the database and refresh, nothing changed. There are still 377 seats occupied for this entry. And why does that happen? Is because the persistent service layer needs to translate this object into a database entry. When you commit work, there are 2 stages. When you are creating or getting a persistent object, if you debug the program, which I recommend you to, it's simply going to select the data from the database using the select statement, and it's going to convert that entry into an object, right? And so the object is not actually the entry from the database. You can change that object as much as you like, and that will not reflect into the database entry unless you commit work. Because when you commit the work, you're gonna send a message to the agent class to translate that object back to a database entry. So I'm gonna run the commit work statement, right? And if you refresh our table, you can see the seats occupied are now 378. So this is very interesting because you can work on runtime with tons and tons of persistent objects. You can change every single data from these objects, unless the business key, of course. And let's say you don't want to commit any of that work you did. You just, okay, I screwed it up, let's try again. You just close the program without committing the work, and everything is lost. Everything is back to normal, the way it should be, right? So the possibilities of using the ABAP persistent service is endless. This is just an introduction, and perhaps in the future I will try to make some new videos. I'm currently working in a project using the persistent object service, which is awesome. But, however, as everything in the world, it has pros and cons. So the pros is that you are able to handle data entries from the database as objects and give life to those objects. You're gonna give actions to those database entries, and that is sweet. But one of the problems of the persistent object service is that it's not very report friendly. If you want to, for example, display an ALV with all the flights from the company airline AA, how are you going to achieve that? Because the get persistent message always require a full business key. You can't just give the one business key and expect a table of objects to be returned as a regular select would work. It's not that way. It's not like that. And I know there are alternative methods for this. For example, the get persistent by query, but that's another class. And overall, it's very difficult to use persistent objects for reports. I mean, if you want to do something simple, some simple report, I don't recommend using the persistent object service. But if you're working mainly on background service, on back-end services like the creation of an invoice or stuff like that, I strongly recommend the use of persistent objects because you can encapsulate all the actions that a database entry should be able to do. And so it's beautiful for me. I'm sorry, it's just beautiful for me. I love object-oriented programming, and when you give life to things. We know that the ABAP language was not initially developed to be an object-oriented language as much as Java, for example, but they have been adapting the language to accept all this kind of new technology, including the ABAP object-oriented stuff. But this is just beautiful, right? So thanks for watching. Sorry to take. I think I took longer than I expected, but thanks for watching, and I see you next time.